and especially the reascent of this Ashe. I'm going to come back to that later because it's very, very important when we're talking about Kundalini and spiritual processes. There are also the stories and myths of the different Orishas. These are all about, from my point of view anyway, limited point of view, the dynamics of the spiritual phenomenon of Kundalini. Okay. The myth of Osiris. Osiris is sometimes called Osir or Wasir, depending on your particular sect or particular beliefs. And I'm only using the word Osiris because it's the most commonly used of the words. The Osiris myth, and this is very important, the Osiris myth arises just before the first Kemetic Egyptian dynasty. And really it is the origin of Egypto-Nubian civilization. Wallace Budge, the late keeper of the British Museum, translated the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is better known as the Book of the Papyrus of Ani. But even he reluctantly has to admit that the origin of Egyptian civilization, which is the origin of the structures of modern civilization, is almost entirely due to the spread of this cult. Osiris is spoken of in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Papyrus of Ani, and is compiled at the very least, and by compiled I mean written, at the very least 3,000 years before Christ, before the Common Era, and maybe before 5869 BC, depending on which Egyptologist you want to follow. But he's usually associated with the first Pharaoh, Pharaoh Menes, who united Upper and Lower Egypt, and he was obviously and clearly an African. He was not Asiatic, he was not European, he was not even mixed. We have statues of him. There's no way to explain it away. Believe me, people have tried. Tried to explain away Akhenaten. He wasn't really an African because he had an illness. And that's why his jaw was so long. But the ideas, the germinal spiritual ideas in the Papyrus of Ani predate even its compiling by many, many years, perhaps thousands of years. The pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom are really the bedrock of the Book of the Dead. Later ideas we find in the three principal, or the three dominant Western religions, all have their root in this book. The later ideas on the immortal soul, final judgment, judgment in the heart, conscience, heaven, hell, resurrection, all of these ideas are foreshadowed in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They're included in the early what's called Theban Recision, and it's written on papyri and coffins, and it's written primarily in hieroglyphs, but it doesn't have any particular order. And later in what's called a Sayyid Recision, which is anterior to the 26th dynasty, which lasted even in Ptolemaic times and later. You find the myth of Osiris, the cult of Osiris, practiced even in Rome and various parts of Great Britain. So it is a great religion, a great cult, and it really holds sway over the imagination of the ancient world for millennia. In the last one, the Sayyid Recision model or rendition is written in three languages: Demotic, Hieratic, and Hieroglyphic script. Now, the early Egyptians were not Proto-Semites or brown Mediterranean, as many European Egyptologists have said, and some still assert, although fewer, but instead were clearly indigenous Africans from the west, central, and eastern regions of Africa who migrated to the Nile Valley. Check Anta Diop's work, African Origin of Civilization, 1974, I refer you to. Also to Martin Bernal's 1987 book, Black Athena, The Afro-Asiatic Roots of Classical Civilization, and Basil Davidson's Africa in History. But beyond these historical analyses, we also have computerized and scientific analysis today to support this idea. There have been archaeological digs, even including the one most recently in Tasseti, 3300 BC, where they've analyzed not only the bones, but also the cultural artifacts. And these clearly, civilization moves up from the south to the north. But there have also been craniometric studies that have gone into the graves, unearthed the skeletons, measured their skulls, and found out indeed that this is an African type. And finally, there is what's called a melanin granule test. If you put melanin under a mic, what they did is they went in and dug up some mummies, took some skin from some mummies, and looked under an electron microscope. And if you do, at certain times, treating it a certain way, the granules, the melanin granules, will flare. It will give you some idea of the percentage of melanin in the skin. And the melanin in the skin was clearly the same as the indigenous black populations of the Africans in that area. Ivan van Sertima's work in Egypt Revisited is an excellent reference for this, in which he talks in more detail about those particular studies and the archaeological digs. Now, the great change, really, the great change that revolutionized the religious views of the early Kemetic Egyptians just before now the dawn of the dynastic era were due primarily to the rise and spread of the cult of Osiris or Osir throughout Egypt. This new doctrine held something radically different. One, that the dead body of a man was a sacred thing, not to be buried, or rather not to be burned or left out to rot or devoured by men or beasts or mutilated. This was a radical change. And also, the dead body must be taken care of, embalmed, mummified, and placed in a special concealed tomb, because it would later from it later would arise the translucent, transparent, immaterial, and repugnant, glorious form in which the spirit soul of the deceased would arise and take up all of its faculties, mental, psychic, and otherwise. It was beginning the idea of resurrection and rebirth. Osir or Osiris is often associated with the anointed mummy, and often associated with cycles of renewal and rebirth. The historical Osiris, whoever he or she was clearly an avatar. An avatar is a human being who, for reasons that transcend present conceptualization, has the capacity to bring into the world a new order, a new conceptualization of what it means to be a human being, and to radically alter a person's or a human being's perceptions of things. Yep. Jesus the Christ was an avatar. Krishna was an avatar. The Buddha was an avatar. They usually don't lead armies. They come with an idea that revolutionizes the way people are. This cult of Osiris, this theory of salvation, I believe anyway, is the mind's projective symbol and memory or apprehension of the cosmic energetic process of E equals MC squared, where energy or light falls or is captured into the solid tomb of matter, only to be freed and reawakened as some future cycle of existence. This is an apprehension of what that process is like, because the E equals MC squared, matter is repressed energy. This is energy, and if the energy is released from it, it's a form of energy, it's a form of light. All is light. The translated titles for the Book of the Dead, or the Book of the Dead, the Papyrus of Ani, but also the Book of the Coming Forth by Day and Manifested in the Light. The Osiris Odyssey unfolds all the stages, I believe, of human incarnation from prior to birth, life, love, family conflicts, sibling rivalry, betrayal, murder, death, faith, resurrection, and reawakening to divinity. All of those, I believe, are unfolded in the Osiris story. Now, there are variations of this story, slight shifts and changes, but I'm going to present primarily the one that is most popular, the most dominant one anyway. This was taken primarily from the writings of Plutarch, who was a compiler during that time, during the Roman and Greek time, of these earlier myths and earlier stories of Osiris, and also from Wallace Budge's book, Osiris and the Egyptian Resurrection. Remember, this story is over 6,000 years old. It captured the human imagination because it was able to talk not only about day-to-day bone and spit and blood life and relationships, but also divine relationship and incarnation. Now,